5.
Curry hits a three.
4.
Houston with a drive. Deep left field.
3.
Magic hit by Watt. Sack number 10.
2.
Messi with a record-breaking goal.
1.
Welcome to BSS Sports. Now, here are your hosts, Steve, and Trevor.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of BSS Sports. My name is Stephen Schill with the ever lovely Trevor, Struthers, and the Maple Leafs of Toronto against the Washington Capitals. Series tied 1-1. Trevor, last week I remember you saying something along the lines of, there is no shot that the Maple Leafs have in winning this. Now, alright, Toronto has one game, so you're not completely wrong. Washington could take the next 3. But with that being said, do you want to retract your statement at all?
No. Washington will win this series. I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind. Even with, you can't deny the fact the Leafs have hung in there for the first 2 games against them. They both go to overtime. And in the case of the Leafs, eventually somebody had to score in game number 2, and it was the Leafs. It was a beautiful pass, too, to set up the play. But, I mean, that was bound to happen eventually, where the Leafs, I mean, they're a team that can score, and they found ways to score on Braden Holtby. He has to be a little sharper, potentially, as well, as the Caps just have to do more to find the back of the net, because they're really struggling with that as well. Frederik Andersen has played well, but he's not on the level of, Carey Price, Braden Holtby, stuff like that, so they really do have to do more to create more chances against the Leafs, and I'm really interested to see how this series plays out in Toronto, just with that fan base that, it's going to be hard for the actual Leaf fans to get in the building because tickets are so expensive, but for the ones that are there, they're probably going to be going crazy, and that'll be an atmosphere a lot like what it was like in Edmonton, I'm sure, with the first couple of games against the Sharks.
Do you think, that's an interesting topic you mentioned there, do you think the Maple Leaf price for tickets will ever go down? Because there's so many people always talking, you know what, it's cheaper to go to Boston to a game, it's cheaper to go down to Ottawa, it's cheaper to go pretty much anywhere else. I feel that's kind of a bad business model, but at the same time, they're getting people to buy it.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially when it comes to playoffs, I mean, they have been so rare for the Leafs that, playoff tickets are hard to come by per se, and as long as the demand's there, I mean, it's simple business rules, right? As long as the demand's there, nothing's going to change. If anything, it'll get more and more expensive, and they keep finding ways to sell tickets. Obviously, Toronto is a huge market, and that has a lot to do with it. The funny thing is that, obviously there'd be a lot of driving involved, and it would take forever, but apparently it'd be cheaper price-wise for people in Toronto to drive down to Washington and watch a game there, buy tickets obviously for games there against the Capitals instead of buying games at the ACC because it's that expensive. And really I think it's ridiculous, but I mean, I can't fault the Maple Leafs if they keep selling tickets at these ridiculous prices that, it would be dumb to lower them.
Thinking back, it's kind of funny that Hamilton was potentially going to get a team. Maybe the NHL was thinking of putting one there just to lower the ticket prices. Now, Ottawa and Boston are also tied at 1 apiece. One of the ones that you said were going to kind of be going back and forth, and anybody could win it. Craig Anderson, the season started, and there was a lot of talk about him, kind of not playing or this or that due to his wife's illness. But how are you liking him so far?
He has done what Craig Anderson does in the playoffs, and that's performed relatively well, except for that gaffe that happened in Game 2, obviously. But when he stayed in his crease, he's performed phenomenally in the playoffs, going back to even his days before when he joined Ottawa. He had a phenomenal performance with the Avalanche against the Sharks in a 1-8 seeded matchup. I think it won like 6 games, something like that, and a lot of that had to do with the performance of Craig Anderson. He's a playoff performer, it seems like, in a lot of ways, and he has shown up and has helped the Senators out. There's no doubt about that. Tuukka Rask at the other end as well, though, has played phenomenally. And, I keep bringing this up, I feel like, every now and then when I mention Tuukka Rask, that he was a Leafs draft pick. But, hey, with Frederik Andersen, maybe they don't care too much about it now. Maybe that they've found a goaltender. But, Tuukka Rask is a guy that can also really step up and perform big time. Obviously, the Bruins know that now for a couple of years. He's a guy that they've been able to ride deep in I think it's 2013 they went to the finals. So with Tuukka Rask, task in goal. Obviously, he's also a great performer, and I mean, these two teams are very close in the way they play. Obviously, Boston's blue line is beat up. There's a very solid chance that tonight that Boston could end up dressing their number 10th defenseman on the depth chart because they're so banged up back there, and obviously Torrey Krug still out as a key loss for them. But McAvoy has jumped in there and is fit right in. And the Senators, they need to get some more scoring from the guys like Turris, Stone, Hoffman, like that. They got a goal from MacArthur, which was his first in 2 years, obviously, with the injury battles that he has had. So that was a big one. And, ultimately able to get Dion Phaneuf to score an overtime winner. And just like that, the series is tied at 1 going to Boston. Playing in Boston, that's another thing, right? Like when you talk about the big U.S. markets, Boston's right up there in terms of fan base, and the excitement's going to be in that building as well. It won't be too different, I'm sure, from playing in Ottawa. And so that's going to be an interesting situation there to see how that would play out with that fan base and these two teams. I mean, this is very much a series that could go 7 games, and that's why home ice is so important.
One series is probably not going to go 7 games. Pittsburgh versus Blue Jackets. The Penguins, defending champions, up 3-0 already on the Blue Jackets. And another, I have to say, I'm shocked. The Predators, 2-0 over the Blackhawks in Chicago. So PK Subban having some fun this year. But I guess the more shocking thing with the fact that, like, sure, okay, they're up 2-0, but the last game in Chicago, they won 5-0. Like, what's going on with Chicago? Are they just too used to it that they're being laid back and like, nah, you know what, we've won too much?
You know, I watched the end of Game 1 between these two teams, and they were down 1-0 to Nashville. Chicago was, obviously, and they needed a goal. There's about 2 minutes left, and who's out there? You see Taves, you see Kane, Panarin, Keith, Seabrook. They have Hossa on this team. They have the guys that can put the puck in the net, but they haven't yet. And a lot of that goes to, obviously, the credit for that goes to Pekka Rinne, that he was able to play 2 games in Chicago against these Blackhawks and shut them out in both. I mean, in Game 1, they stood a chance because Nashville only scored once. But in Game 2, Nashville was able to find the net a bit more. And now you wonder if you're Chicago, do you have to go with Scott Darling in Game number 3, maybe just to change things up? But they just haven't been able to find the back of the net. And, I mean, that's the sole reason why they lost Game 1 and even played a part of it when it comes to Game 2. Obviously, if you score early on in that building, Chicago, I mean, it's going to go crazy, especially with the success that they've had. I mean, we've seen that building go crazy all the time, especially when you get in those later rounds. And so that's something that they just haven't been able to do because they can't beat Pekka Rinne. And a lot of credit goes obviously to him and his play. And he's a guy that's been on the verge of being one of the top goaltenders in the league in terms of his skill and ability. And maybe now it's finally starting to pay off because, I mean, this is obviously fantastic work. I mean, you can make an argument the Blackhawks are one of the toughest offensive teams ultimately in the league, and he shut them down 2 straight playoff games, which is something that I would have said you were crazy if you said this was going to happen in the first couple of games of that series.
Point being that trade between Montreal and Nashville, winners are both teams. So in NBA playoffs, just looking at the top players so far for the Raptor series against the Bucks, DeMar DeRozan against Giannis Antetokounmpo, however you want to say it. DeMar has 27 points. Antetokounmpo, the guy with the A,
the Greek freak.
Thank you. 28 points. So a single Bucks only, their top scorer, 1 point ahead of ours. And then Greg Monroe, 1 ahead of Serge Ibaka in rebounds with 15 versus 14. Then Chris Middleton with 9 assists versus Kyle Lowry's 6. And, I mean, don't want to talk about too much stats because Marc Gasol said stats are ruining basketball, and I think stats are ruining every sport. But with that being said, the Toronto Raptors lost to the Bucks at home, 97-83. Not the greatest. Again, people are looking at the whole, it's not a big deal, don't fret. But, I mean, if the Raptors don't do anything this year, Dwayne Casey out, yes, no?
That's a hard call. Obviously, they're expected to at least win a round clearly this year. There's no doubt about that. And maybe even more, even though they would probably end up, it's pretty likely they'd match up with Cleveland in round 2. So they're expected, obviously, to do something. And if that doesn't happen, then you could make that argument. But I think they've had enough success in these last few years when it comes to regular season and playoffs, when you look at last year for sure, that Dwayne Casey should have a job for a significant amount of time until this team – I would maybe, as long as they keep making the playoffs, run with Dwayne Casey, because he seems to be a guy that, how many Raptors coaches have taken the team to the Eastern Conference Final? That's something as well. It's not an old franchise by any means, but it's definitely something you have to think about. And Dwayne Casey he's delivered essentially, and what the expectations have been for him. So he should definitely be sticking around. I do think the Raptors end up pulling out this series, but the play of Kyle Lowry is the big thing that stood out in game number 1. He was 2 of 11 or 2 of 12, something like that, and we've talked about. It's been brought up before, his struggles in the playoffs, and that right now it's not off to a good start. But now they have to win a game in Milwaukee. Maybe not the most difficult thing in the world to do, but definitely something that you obviously don't plan on. You want to take those games at home when you have the home court advantage. They haven't been able to do that, and Kyle Lowry has got to step his game up. If he does that, then the Raptors can win this series and maybe even give Cleveland a run. But if that doesn't happen, then the Raptors are in trouble.
It's never a good thing when Jurassic Park gets let loose. So, switching gears to baseball, the OK Blue Jays. We're having a rough time. Right now, we currently sit last in the entirety of the NBA. We're second worst in point differential at -20. The only one worse than that is San Diego Padres at -22. And we've lost Jay Happ. So I have to admit, every year we go through this thing where the beginning of the season is, big old hype for the Blue Jays. And this year, I wasn't feeling it. They had the weird argument stuff with Jose Bautista. Look, I know it's early in the season and whatnot, and Josh Donaldson didn't play the entirety of the preseason, but I just feel like I don't know if it's the excitement, the motivation, the contracts, other teams being better, Rodgers being in charge of the Blue Jays, being worst in the league. There's things you can just keep naming off, and I just think the Blue Jays are going to have a rough time this season.
Yeah, well, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Donaldson on the disabled list, Sanchez on the disabled list. Now Happ could very well end up there as well with leaving yesterday's game. So, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty there, and obviously they've struggled immensely out of the gate. There's still a lot of positive with who's left right now in the starting rotation, which is 3 out of the 5, with the other 2 potentially missing some time. But, when Sanchez gets back and Happ gets back, hopefully that happens soon, and obviously their MVP and Josh Donaldson, then this is still a very good team. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The rotation, I had a feeling, and a lot of people did, that it was going to be good. So far, so good. Obviously, it's still really early. The offense, they have what it takes. I've heard a lot of people, they're old now. Dude, it was just last year they went to the ALCS. That's not a lot of time at all. It's not like it was 5 years ago or something like that. These are the same guys. They're getting older year by year, but they're not going to drop off immensely like they have so far. It's a small sample size. The only reason we care this much about it is it's because it's to start the season. That's why.
That's it for this edition of BSS Sports. If you're wanting to catch any of the various playoff actions tonight, the Capitals are in Toronto at 7 p.m. The Senators are in Boston at 7 p.m. again. The Ducks are in Calgary. If you are a Calgary fan, that's on at 10. And then the Raptors play the Bucks Tuesday in Toronto, obviously. Man, I'd hate to be the person that has to schedule these games and make sure that one is not overlapping the other. You can find all of our archived works on YouTube at BSS Productions. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter at BSS Sports. I guess we'll catch you next month.